Hey guys, welcome to day 26 of 100 Days of Code. Today we're going to be learning all about list and dictionary comprehensions. This is something that's actually really unique to the Python language, and it's something that's going to cut down on a lot of the code that we have to write when we're working with lists and dictionaries. And by the end of today, we will build a project to use the NATO phonetic alphabet so that we can spell out various things on the telephone. For example, whenever you need to give your name and you have to spell it out, they might not hear which letter you've said. So normally you'll say something like A for Alpha, N for November, G for Golf. This is what we're aiming to create, a program that works in the console, and it allows us to enter a word. So for example, I'll just put in my name, which I happen to have to spell over the phone many times, and I hit enter, then it'll return a list of all of the NATO phonetic alphabet that matches each of the letters in my name. So I can just read it out to the other person over the phone. Alpha November Golf Echo Lima Alpha. And that way I can use this little tool and be able to spell any word I want easily using the NATO phonetic alphabet. So I hope you're excited to learn about this big topic of comprehensions. And once you're ready, head over to the next lesson and let's get started. The big topic that we're going to explore today is a concept known as a list comprehension. And as I mentioned before, this is something that's really unique to the Python language. In many other programming languages, you don't actually have access to something like this. There's nothing that really compares to it. And it's something that Python developers really, really love because it cuts down on the amount of typing and it just makes the code a lot shorter and in most cases a lot easier to read. So what exactly is a list comprehension? Well, it's a case where you create a new list from a previous list. So far, we've been doing that using for loops. So for example, if I have a list of numbers 1, 2, 3, and I want to create a new list where each number is increased by 1, well then I would use a for loop, creating a new empty list, and then looping through each of the numbers in that list in order to add 1 to each of those numbers. And then I would append each of those increased numbers to my new list. And I would end up with a new list that consists of 3 items, and it will be 2, 3, and 4. Now, using list comprehension, we can take these 4 lines of code and turn it into 1. And the way that we create a list comprehension looks something like this. I like to use the keyword method, where you type out the list comprehension keywords and then replace each of the words with the actual item in your code. The way that we would create any list comprehension is we would create the name of the new list, and instead of creating an empty list and then having to append to it or populate it, we're actually going to create it straight in the same line. So we open up a set of square brackets to denote that we're creating a new list. And then we have this new item for item in list keyword pattern. Here's how it would work. Let's take that same thing that we did before, where we took a list of numbers and we created a new list where each number is increased by 1. And let's see how we would do it using list comprehension. So the first keyword I'm going to replace is the list. So this is the list that we're going to iterate through. And in our case, it's this list of numbers. So let's replace that list keyword with the actual list, which is numbers. The next thing that is easy to understand is each item in the list. So we can call this anything we want. In the for loop here, we called it n. So why don't we go ahead and call it n again? This n is going to represent each of the numbers in that list of numbers, just as it does in this for loop. And the final keyword that we haven't yet replaced is the new item. So what do we want each of the new items to be in this new list? Well, each of the new items is basically calculated by taking n and then adding 1 to it. So this line is the expression or the code that we need to execute in order to get a new item. So this becomes our final list comprehension. We have our list of numbers and then we create a new list where we loop through each of the numbers n inside this list of numbers, and then for each of the n, we add 1 to it in order to create the final list. So when you look at a list comprehension just like this, as in the real code, it can be a little bit confusing to see how would you read it, which order does it happen. But when you're using this keyword method that I often use, where you just type out what you need to have inside a list comprehension. You need a name for the new list, you need a set of square brackets, and then inside the square brackets you have new item for item in list, and then you go through it replacing each of the keywords, list, item, and new item. So I want you to have a go at actually writing out this code. Go ahead and create a new PyCharm project, and I want you to go into the Python console. We're not actually going to be writing code inside our main.py. And the reason is because the console allows us to write code line by line, and then we can view our variables really easily on the right-hand side pane here. For example, if I have my list of numbers 1, 2, 3, and then I have to write out my list comprehension where we create our new list, which I'll call new numbers. And then we have to create our list comprehension. So the way to remember it is new item for item in list. So now go ahead and write this out and see if you can remember how we actually structure our list comprehension, and see if you can get it to work within your PyCharm console. So pause the video, give that a go. All right, so our list is of course this list of numbers. So let's replace that first. And then for each of the items in that list of numbers, well, we can call it anything we want. So I'm just going to call it n or num. It doesn't matter. But as long as you're consistent in using it when you create the new item, because each new item is going to be the n, which is each number in the list, plus 1. So now when I hit enter, you can see I've got this new list called new numbers created from the previous list, numbers. And this now has the same number of items, but each item is now increased by 1. Now, it's important to remember that when we say list comprehension, it doesn't strictly mean that you can only work with lists. You can work with other sequences like strings, for example. So here I've got a variable called name, which is just a string. It's the word Angela. And I'm creating a new list by using a list comprehension that has this kind of code. Now I want you to pause for a second and think about what would be in this new list. What would it look like? And then I want you to try it out inside PyCharm. So pause the video now. All right, so name equals Angela. This is the variable that we're working with. And then I'm going to create a new list, which I'll call letters list. This new list is going to be created using my list comprehension. So it's going to be letter for letter in name. And what this does is it takes this sequence, this string, it goes through each of the letters in that string, and then it adds each of the letters into this new list. So when I hit enter, you can see this is what letters list looks like. It's just split off my string into individual letters, and it's added it into a brand new list. As I mentioned, these things in Python, like a list or a string or a range or tuple, they're called sequences because they have a specific order. And when you perform a list comprehension, it's going to take that sequence and it's going to go through it in order, either be it the letters in the string or the items in a list, and then it's going to take each of those items in that correct order and then do something with it, either add 1 to it, or in this case, do nothing and just add it to a new list. Here's a challenge for you. Can you take the range, which is also a sequence that we can iterate through, and then create a range between 1 and 5. And remember that the way that the range works is it's going to take 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4, but it's not going to go up to 5. I want you to loop through this range and then create a list where each of the numbers in the range is doubled. And the final list should look like this. It'll be 2, 4, 6, and 8. Pause the video and see if you can complete this challenge. All right, so let's create our new list, which I'm just going to call range list. And we're going to use that keyword pattern to remind ourselves. So it's going to be new item for item in list. And this list in this case is actually not going to be a list. It's going to be a range between 1 and 5. And then each of the items, we get to give it a name, which I'll just call num. And then in this new list, what is each new item going to be? Well, it's going to be num multiplied by 2. So now when I hit enter, I get my range list, which is 2, 4, 6, 8. So it's looped through each of the numbers in the range, and it's multiplied each of those numbers by 2, and then it's created a new list using each of those numbers. Now, the final thing I want to show you regarding list comprehensions is that there's also such a thing as a conditional list comprehension. This takes our keywords a little bit further, whereas previously we stopped right here. New item for item in list, we can also tag on 2 more keywords, if and a test. What this is going to allow us to do is to only add this new item and only to perform this code if the test actually passes. Here's an example. I've got a bunch of names here: Alex, Beth, Caroline, Dave, Eleanor, and Freddie. Now, one of the neat things that you can actually do with the Python console is not only can you view what all of the variables are equal to, but you can also edit them if you have an issue. The sharp-eyed amongst you will know that I've actually made a typo in this name. It's not Eleanor, it's actually spelled a little bit differently. So what I can do on the right-hand pane here is I can right-click on that piece of data that I want to change, and then click Set Value, and then actually change the data here. Now that I've got that spelled out correctly, if I type names and hit enter, you can see it's now been corrected, and this is my new list of names. So using this list of names, I'm going to try and create a new list of names, but I only want the short names. I only want the names which is made up of 4 letters or less, like Alex or Beth. The way I would do this is I would create a new list, which is called short names, and then I would use my list comprehension. And remember, in this case, the keywords are new item for item in list, and then if and a test. So let's fill in the easy parts first. The list is going to be our list of names. The item, I can call it anything I want. I'll just call it name in terms of the singular form of names. And then once I loop through each of the names inside my list of names, what is the new item going to be? Well, it's actually going to be unmodified. It's just going to be that same name. But in this case, I'm only going to add that name to the list if it passes this test. And this test is going to look at the length of the name, which I created here. So if I named this n, then I would be testing it against n, and I would be adding n as well. But because I've called it name, so I'm going to use that name right here in the condition. So if the length of the name is less than 5, so it has 4 or less characters, then I'm going to add that name to my new list. Now when I hit enter, you can see that I've got this new list of short names, and it only contains the names Alex, Beth, and Dave. So this list comprehension is now a little bit more complex, because the first thing it does is it goes through each of the names inside this list of names. It checks each of those names for its length, and if the length is 5, then it adds the name to this new list. Now, here's a challenge for you. I want you to take all of the names from this list of names, which are made up of 5 letters or more, so basically Caroline, Eleanor, and Freddie, and I want you to turn each of these names to the uppercase version. What you should end up with is a list where you have Caroline in all caps, Eleanor in all caps, and Freddie in all caps. But of course, you're not going to just type this out. You're going to use list comprehension. Pause the video and see if you can complete this challenge. All right, I'm going to call this new list long names because I haven't eaten for a while and I lack imagination. Now, in order to create this list of long names, I'm going to use that new keyword pattern that we learned, which is new item for item in list if test. The list is again going to be our list of names. Each of the items, we can call it anything we want, but I'm going to call it name. And if you find that this is too similar to this, you can call it anything you want. Nom, you can use French, you can just write N, or you can do anything you want. This name that we're looping through is going to be tested in order to see if we're actually going to create a new item. So the test in this case is we're checking to see if the length of the name is now greater than 5. And if this name that we're currently looping through passes this test, then we get to specify what the new item should be. So the new item is going to be that particular name that passed the test, but then it's going to be uppercased. So we're going to call name.upper in order to create the new item that's going to be added to the list. So now once I hit enter, you can see the new list that I've created. Long names has Caroline, Eleanor, and Freddie all in uppercase. Essentially, we looped through each of the names in the list. We took each of those names and checked that they're longer than 5. If they were in fact longer than 5, then we looked at this part of the code to see what we should do with each of those names. And in our case, we've turned it into uppercase. So there's quite a lot of theory covered in today's lesson. And if you want to see the code that I've been writing so far, then you can always head over to the day 26 end replit in order to either download it or just read through the code that I've been typing. Now, in order to be able to fully understand what's going on, you can't just watch me talk about it. You have to practice. So in the coming lessons, I've got a whole bunch of exercises for you to practice using and creating list comprehensions for yourself. And that way, once you've done the drills, you've done the code press-ups, then you'll be able to show off your list comprehension muscles. For all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson. Now it's time to put what you've learned into practice and to actually learn through doing. So if you go to Replit, where you're going to go to day 26.1 list comprehension, and you're going to complete this challenge. So pause the video, head over there, read the instructions, and see if you can complete the challenge. Once you're done, head back over here and I'll go through the solution with you. All right, so in this case, what we're trying to do is we're taking this list of numbers and we're basically going to write a single line of code here to change it so that we end up with a new list where each number is squared. A square number is basically just the number multiplied by itself. So for example, 4 squared is 16, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9. So let's go ahead and create our new list, which needs to be called squared numbers because that's what we're going to print out, and that's what the automated testing is going to be looking for. This new list is going to be created using a list comprehension. So we're going to use our keyword method. New item for item in list. And in this case, we actually don't need to do any conditional checking. We're taking every single one of these items. So this is the keyword that we need to fill in. The list in this case is our list of numbers. Each of the items, we can call it anything we want, but I'm going to call it num. And this new item is going to be num, so each of the items in that list multiplied by itself. You can either do it like this, which will get you the output that you need. Alternatively, you can use Python's built-in exponents, which is just num multiplied by 2. And this will square that number, which will give you exactly the same results. Now you're ready to head over to the next lesson where we've got another list comprehension exercise. All right, let's keep working while our brain muscles are hot. Now we're going to go over to day 26.2, our second list comprehension exercise. So head over there, pause the video, read through the instructions, and try to complete the code exercise. I'll see you on the other side where we'll go through the solution together. Pause the video now. Okay, so in this exercise, what we're trying to do is we're going to take this list of numbers and we're going to write a list comprehension to create a new list called result. Now we're only going to need one line of code again because we're going to be using a list comprehension. And what we're going to do with our list comprehension is to take only the numbers from this list of numbers which has an even number. We should basically end up with only the 2, the 8, and 34 because every other number in this list is odd. We're going to create our results, which is our new list, and then we're going to put in our keywords. So it's going to be new item for item in list. And because this time we're not taking every single item from the original list that we're looping through, we're going to need to add a if statement to make a conditional test. So let's start with the easy thing. The list that we're going to iterate through is our list of numbers. Each of the items I'm going to call num. And for each of those numbers, we're going to test to see if the number modulo by 2, which remember means number divided by 2 and then get the remainder. If that remainder is equal to 0, well then that means that that number is even. If you remember from previously, we could use modulo to check if a number has any remainder. So if I do 3 modulo 2, you can see that has a remainder of 1. But when I do 6 modulo 3, that has no remainder because it can be cleanly divided. So now that we've tested if each number modulo 2 is equal to 0, well then if that test passes, then that particular number that passed the test is going to be welcomed to this new list of results. So now when I hit run, you can see the result that I get is the same as my expected results. Now we've got one final list comprehension exercise for you. So head over to the next lesson and complete the exercise. All right, so we're now on to our final list comprehension exercise of the day. And just a word of warning, this exercise is quite hard. I decided that the previous two were a little bit easier and you've now kind of warmed up and you've gotten going. It's time to test your knowledge on a number of things that you've learned. The first thing I want you to do is take a look at these two files and look at the structure of the data in there. And then have a read through the instruction and see if you can complete this challenge. This is the output that you're expecting when your new list called result is printed. Pause the video and give this a go. All right, so we know that we've got two text files with a new piece of data on each line. Essentially, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take the data in file1.txt and compare it against the data in file2.txt, and then we're trying to get hold of the data which exists in both of these files. So if file 1 contained 123, file 2 contained 234, then the result should be a list that contains the overlapping numbers. 2 and 3 exists in both files. Now, in order to pass the test, the result must be a list that contains integers, so whole numbers, not strings. So when you print it out, if you see the numbers as they are, then that means they are integers. But if you see quotation marks around each of the numbers, then they are strings instead. And our code checking is not going to allow that to pass. The first thing we need to do is to use our read lines method that we've used several times before to read the data from each of these files and create a list from each line. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to use my with open and I'm going to tap into my file1.txt and I'm going to save this as file1. And then this file is going to be read. And I'm going to call file1.readlines, and then I'm going to save this list to a new variable called file1data. And notice how I've actually made a typo here because I want file1.txt instead of just file.txt. It's good that I spotted it. And then we're going to do the same with file2 and change all the places where we have 1. So copy and pasting is always a little bit prone to error, but hopefully we'll manage this time. Now that I've got file 1 data and file 2 data, which are both lists, I can now think about how I can compare those two and create my new list, which is going to be called result. Now, result is a new list, and I'm going to use my full list of keywords inside this new list to create the list comprehension. So new item for item in list if test. The list that I'm going to test is actually this first list. I'm going to take the file 1 data, which is a list of numbers, and then I'm going to go through each of the numbers inside this list, and then I'm going to do a check. And the check is where this file 2 is going to come into play. So I'm going to check to see, well, if this number that I'm looping through exists in, remember the in keyword, this file 2 data, this other list, well, then I'm going to include this number inside my new list. So this number is going to go into the new list. At the moment, when I hit run, you can see I'm getting a whole bunch of strings. So in addition, I have to modify this number so that I convert it into an integer. So I end up with the same output as is expected here. Did you remember all of the things that we've learned before, like the in and the with open and also the converting to int? Did you manage to complete this challenge? If you had any trouble at all, be sure to review the relevant parts, for example, opening files or reading lines from the files, which we covered in previous days. Alternatively, if it's the list comprehension that's hard, then be sure to review the list comprehension lesson in today's course and make sure that you really understand what's going on in the code before you continue. Now, the reason why we're learning about list comprehensions is because when we created our US states game, I realized that the code that we were writing could be a lot shorter if only we knew about list comprehensions. So I want you to head back over to your code for the US states game and open it up. And I want you to look at this if statement. So when the user types exit, we create a new list of missing states in order to save it to a CSV file. I want you to change this code using your new knowledge of list comprehension and see if you can cut down this code by 3 or 4 lines. Pause the video and complete this challenge now. Alright, so instead of all of this, creating a new empty missing state and then going through a for loop, we can simply do this in one line. So again, it's going to be called missing states. And this is going to be a new list, but this time it's going to be created using our list comprehension. New item for item in list if test. The list in this case that we're looping through is all of our states. So we're going to replace that with all states. Now, each of the items is basically a state in that list. And the test that we're going to make is to see, well, if the state is not in the guessed states, which has states added every time the user makes a correct guess. So we can basically take this part of our previous code and put it here. And in that case, then we're going to add this particular state, which passed this test, into this new list. This one line basically will replace all 4 of these lines, and it cuts down dramatically on the amount of code. And it reads relatively well as well. Add a state to this new list if we loop through all the states in the list of states, and if that state is not in this list of guessed states. List comprehensions are super popular with Python developers, and I hope through some of these exercises you can see why, just in terms of the sheer amount of code that it cuts down on and how much it simplifies things. Now, in addition to list comprehensions, we can also do comprehensions with dictionaries. So in the next lesson, that's what we're going to be looking at. Now that you've seen how list comprehension works, it's time to learn about another type of comprehension, dictionary comprehensions. This is also super useful because it allows us to create a new dictionary from the values in a list or in a dictionary. For example, we could write out our keywords like this. We're going to create a new dictionary called new dict, and it's going to be created using this curly bracket now instead of square brackets. And inside the comprehension, we get to set the new key, the new value, and we get to loop through items in a list. So any sort of iterable, a list, a range, a string, anything you want. And this is the simplest form of dictionary comprehension. Now, remember that a dictionary comprehension is just a way of creating a dictionary using this shortened syntax. We could take this one step further. We could also create a new dictionary based on the values in an existing dictionary. So we could take that dictionary and then get hold of all of the items inside that dictionary and then split it into a key and a value. So now we're looping through each of the keys and each of the values in all of the items from the dictionary. And we can use these key and value variables to create a new key or a new value. And to go one step further for completion's sake, we can of course, as always, add our condition at the very end, just like we did before with list comprehensions. So let's see how this code works in practice. I'm going to take my previous list of names and then I'm going to click on this button to refresh my console so that all of the previous variables get deleted. So now I'm going to create a new list of names. So I'm going to use the previous names I had before, and this is our list here. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dictionary where I generate a random score for each of these names. So let's imagine we had a bunch of students and we wanted to create some random scores for each of them so that they would get a random score between 1 and 100. Now, for the teachers out there, I really hope this is not what you do when you generate student scores. But essentially, we want to create a dictionary which looks something like this. Each of the students in this list, so let's start out with Alex. We want our dictionary to have a key, which is the name of the student, and then a value, which is their random score. And we want to continue through that list of names until we've generated a random score for each of them. That's the goal, and now we have to use our dictionary comprehension. Remember, when we're creating a new list using list comprehension, we're using square brackets, but now we're creating a dictionary, so we're going to use curly brackets. Now inside these curly brackets, I'm going to put down my usual list of keywords. So it's going to be a new key, colon, new value that we're going to be adding to our new dictionary. And then I'm going to do a for item in list. In this case, our list or our iterable is going to be our list of names. Now, even though in my keywords I always use list, it's just easier to imagine, but it's actually in fact any sort of iterable like a range or a string or a tuple. Once we've got our list of names, we're going to name each of those names something, and I'm just going to call it student. So we're looping through all the students in our list of names here. And for each of those students, I'm going to create the student as the new key. But the value is going to be a new random number. So in order to create a random number, I'm going to have to first import the random module. So I've cut out my previous code, imported random, and let's paste that code back in. So now we can replace the value for each of these dictionary entries with random.randint, and we can generate a random number between 1 and 100. So now when I hit enter, you'll see our new student scores dictionary being created, and you can see we've got all of our students in our list of names, Alex, Beth, Caroline, etc. And each of them now have a new random score. So it seems like everybody did pretty well, other than Eleanor, I guess. Random score generating seems to work. Now, the next step, we're going to take this a little bit further because this was quite simple. We just did what we did before, which is looping through a list. But now I want to loop through a dictionary. Luckily, we've now created this brand sparkling new dictionary, our student scores, and I want to use that dictionary in my next dictionary comprehension. So the next thing I want to do is to be able to create a dictionary called past students. And this is going to be a dictionary which looks through this dictionary of student scores. So imagine you have an entire high school where everybody's scores are logged, and you look at everybody who's got a score of 60 or over. And then we're going to say, well, those people have passed and everybody else has failed their year. Essentially, we should loop through this entire dictionary of items, figure out which of these have a value that's equal to 60 or over 60, and then we're going to add those items back into this new dictionary of past students. So essentially, we'd probably end up with Beth, with Caroline, with Dave, and with Freddie. So it will still look pretty much the same as our student scores dictionary. So it would have something like Beth and then colon her score, which is 72. But just the fact that she's included in this dictionary means that she has passed. And we will end up with this new dictionary where everybody is a past student and their scores. Have a think about how you might do this, and if you're up for the challenge, try pausing the video and seeing if you can complete this. As always, we know that we're going to create a new dictionary, so curly braces, and then it's going to be our new key colon new value, and then it's going to be for. And now, because we are looping through this dictionary and we want to get hold of each of the values, we're going to use the method that we saw in our previous slides. So we're going to get hold of each of the keys and the value from our dictionary. And then after the in keyword, it's the thing that we actually want to loop through, which is our dictionary. Once we've got our dictionary, then we need to call the items method on that dictionary. So it's items with a set of parentheses, not just the items as an attribute. So now that we've got our keywords down, let's convert it to our particular case. So our dictionary is called Students Scores. Let's make sure I spell it correctly. So studentscores.items gets all of the items in that dictionary. And then for each of the keys, which is going to be student, and for each of the values, which is going to be their score, we're going to loop through this dictionary. The new key is just going to be the student's name, and the new value is just going to be their score. But what we need to do is we need to check using an if statement if the student that we're currently looping through has passed. So the test is basically looking at the score and seeing if it is greater than or equal to 60. And if that is the case, then we're going to take this student as the new key, their score as the new value, and place it inside this new dictionary. So now if I go ahead and hit enter, then you can see we've got our new dictionary being created, which only contains all the students who have passed. So it's Beth, Caroline, Dave, and Freddie, and we've lost Alex and Eleanor. So in order to get more practice at this, I've prepared some more coding exercises for you on dictionary comprehension. So head over to the next lesson and we'll get started. All right, it's time to put what you've learned to practice and see if you can complete these challenges on dictionary comprehension. So I want you to find the exercise that is day 26.4. Now, once you've found day 26.4, Dictionary Comprehension 1, you'll see that this is the starting code I have for you. I've got a sentence here, which is a string, and your job is to count how many letters there are in each word and create a dictionary that looks like this. So your final dictionary is going to be saved as this variable called result, and it's going to be printed to the console. Have a read of the instructions. Especially be aware that you might need to do some Googling to figure out how to convert a sentence into a list of words, and use the hints if you need them. So pause the video and give that a go now. So the biggest hurdle of this challenge is not actually the dictionary comprehension. It's the figuring out how to convert a sentence, a string, into a list of words. So I've basically just typed out the entire query with Python at the end into Google. And if I click on the first Stack Overflow answer, you can see that they're telling you that you should probably investigate the split method. The split method basically splits a string by space and converts it into a list. That's exactly what we need in order to solve this challenge. And also in the hints, you can see that I've linked to a page in the W3 School documentation for Python. And I like linking to the W3 schools just because you have the try it yourself section where you can actually run the code and see what is the result of running this method. So you have a sentence, welcome to the jungle. Once you call split on it, it creates a list with each word as a separate item in the list. Now we're basically ready to tackle our challenge. We're going to create our result, which is going to be a dictionary. So let's start out with the keyword method. So we'll say new key colon new value for item in list. Now, in this case, we're not actually iterating through a dictionary, and we're only iterating through a string, which is just a sequence. So we can replace this list with our sentence, but we can't leave it at just the sentence because then it's going to loop through each of the letters. So instead of having it as just the sentence string, we're going to use the split method to convert it into a list of words. And once we've done that, then every time we loop through it, we're actually looping through each word in this list. And it's usually a good idea to test out the code. So let's comment out these last two lines of code, and then let's take our sentence and let's say for word in sentence dot split. And now let's print out each of the words. And when I run this, you can see it has split our entire sentence by the spaces to create a list of words. And each time I iterate through it using for word in sentence split, just like we have here, it's going to go through each word in turn and then check each of them. So now let's reactivate our code. And we want to fix the very last parts. So the new key is going to be the actual word because we want each of the words in our dictionary as the key. And the new value is going to be the length of the word. So now when I hit run, you can see we've got a dictionary where each word is the key and the number of characters in each word is the value. And now I've completed the challenge. All right, so now we're on to the next dictionary comprehension exercise, which is day 26.5, dictionary comprehension 2. And in this challenge, you're going to be converting a dictionary of temperatures in Celsius to their corresponding temperature in Fahrenheit. So this is how you convert a Celsius temperature to Fahrenheit. So the temperature multiplied by 9 divided by 5, and then plus 32. So you saw this in a previous lesson as well. So pause the video, have a read of the instructions, take a look at the hints if you get stuck, and see if you can complete this challenge. So in this case, we have a slightly different exercise from before, because we're now going to be working with a dictionary to create a new dictionary. Let's write our code here. And let's create our new variable, which needs to be called weatherf. And this weatherf is going to be a new dictionary. Let's put in our keyword method to create a new dictionary from a dictionary. So new key colon new value for, and then it's parentheses key comma value. So be really careful here. I've seen a lot of students just use the colon in this case, but it's actually a tuple. So it should be key comma value. And then we specify the dictionary that we want to loop through. And then we call dot items on it. And remember, this is a method, so it needs the parentheses at the end. So now let's replace the relevant parts of this line. So our dictionary is going to be this one, our weather_c. That's the dictionary we're looping through, and we're going to get hold of all of the items in that dictionary and then get each of the keys, which I'll call day, and value, which I'll call temp_C, because it'll be the temperature in Celsius. So now that I'm looping through each of the days and the temperatures in our weather dictionary, then we're going to create our new key and new value. So the new key is actually still going to be the same day. It's going to be unchanged because we want this as our output, and it looks pretty much the same as this one, other than the fact that we've converted the value. So the new value, though, is going to be calculated using this formula. So we're going to take our temp C and then we're going to multiply it by 9 divided by 5, and then we're going to add 32. If you want, you can add the parentheses around this line, but because we're doing maths and we're going from left to right and we're first doing multiply, divide, then we do add and subtract, then it's actually completely optional in this case. But we'll just include it in there for completion's sake. So now when I hit run, you'll see that I've got a dictionary that's being generated with each of the days in the week from this dictionary, and each of the temperatures have been converted to Fahrenheit. So this is super useful, and you often find yourself needing to work with values in a dictionary. In this lesson, I want to show you how you can use loops with pandas data frames and how to iterate over a pandas data frame. So here I've got a simple dictionary. I've got two keys, student and score, and under student I've got a list of student names, and under score I've got a list of their corresponding scores. Now we know that we can loop through a dictionary very simply by creating a for loop, and then we say, well, we're going to go through each of the key and values inside this student dictionary, and then we're going to get all of the items in order to be able to loop through it. So now when I print each of the keys, you can see that it goes through the dictionary and prints both of the keys. And similarly, I can get it to loop through both of the values. So this is how we've been looping through dictionaries, and we've been using it in our dictionary comprehension. Now, you can loop through a data frame in the same way that you loop through a dictionary. In a lot of ways, you can consider a data frame pretty much as if you're working with a Python dictionary. So I'm going to go ahead and import pandas, and I'm going to use pandas to create a new data frame, and it's going to be created from our student dictionary. So you've seen all of this before, and I'll just call this student data frame. And I can print it for you to see what it looks like. So this is our data frame. It looks like a pretty standard table with the first column being all of the indices. So at 0 index is this first row, and that basically denotes the index of each row. Now working with this data frame, we can actually loop through a data frame using the same method as before. So we can say for key, comma, value in our student data frame dot items. So if I print each of the keys, you can see it's just going to give me the titles of each column. But if I print each of the values, then it's going to give me the data in each of the columns. Now, this is not particularly useful because it's basically just looping through the names of our columns and then the data inside each column. This is why Pandas has a inbuilt loop, and it's a method called iter rows, and it allows us to loop through each of the rows of the data frame rather than each of the columns. And the way that we do that is we again use a for loop, and then we can get hold of each of the index inside each row, so that corresponds to the number in that first column, and then we can get hold of the data in the row. And then we can say for index row in our data frame, which is student data frame, and then it's that method dot iter rows. And now I can loop through each of those rows and print out either the index for each of those rows. So you can see that this is going to print out our data frame here, and then in order to print out each of the index, it's 0, 1, 2, but I can also print out each of the rows. So now I get the first row has a student and a score, the second row has a student and a score, and the third row has a student and score. So each of these rows is a Panda series object. So that means we can tap into the row and then get hold of the value under a particular column by using the dot notation. So we can say row.student. And now when it goes through the loop, you can see first it's going to print out our entire data frame, and then it's going to print out each of the students inside that data frame. Now I can also say row.score, and now it's going to give me each of the scores inside the data frame. And I can even do something like this where I say if the row.student is equal to Angela, well then we can print that particular row that we're currently looping on dot score. And this way we would get the student Angela's score, which happens to be 56, as you can verify here. Now we're finally ready to tackle our project, and this project is based on a real life struggle that I have. Often when I'm calling a company and over the phone I have to give some sort of details, right? They'll ask me, what is your name and can you spell it? So I'll have to be like Angela, and they're like, wait, was that an E? Was that a B? What did you say? In these cases, often I have to sort of default to some sort of naval alphabet where I say A is for Alpha, N for November, G for Golf. And then at some point I forget what E stands for. I'm like, E for elephant? And there have been times where I've just completely taken the mick and said things like M for mnemonic, P for pneumonia, W for wrench, which doesn't make any sense at all because these are silent letters. And I've had some very angry people, but it was quite fun. So now what we want to create is we want to create a tool that takes the NATO phonetic alphabet, which was generated because it's often really, really important for the other side to know exactly what it is that you said and which letters you're spelling out so that they don't mistaken your E for a B or your T for a C, because it all sounds really similar. Head over to the course resources page where you can find the starting files for the NATO alphabet project. I want you to practice with list comprehension and with dictionary comprehension. But in this case, we're not going through a dictionary per se, but we're actually going through a data frame because our data lives inside a CSV. So we're going to be reading it using pandas, and then we're going to end up with a data frame. Instead of having a bog standard dictionary comprehension where our keywords were new key, new value, for key value in dictionary.items. Now we're going to change this for loop. So instead of using the simple for loop, where we're just looping through a dictionary, we're going to use this particular loop. So then in this case, we're saying for index row in our data frame, and then it's dot iter rows as the method. So basically I want you to use this different loop in order to loop through our data frame and then create a new dictionary using a new key and new value. So what exactly is it that I want you to do with this? Well, I want you to be able to take the CSV of NATO phonetic alphabet, and I want you to do two things to it. The first thing is for you to create a dictionary in this format. The format is basically the key is going to be the actual letter, so maybe A, and then the value is going to be the corresponding code for the NATO phonetic alphabet. So A actually is for alpha, and then the next one is B, which stands for Bravo. Essentially, we're going to take this CSV and we're going to convert it into a dictionary in this particular format, where the keys are the letters inside the CSV, so that first column, and then the values are the corresponding code words for each of those letters. And the reason why we're talking about iter rows and how to loop through rows of a data frame, instead of just getting you to get hold of the data frame and then just say to dict, like what we did before, is because it's not going to give it to you in this particular format. So you're going to have to use what you've learned about dictionary comprehension in order to create a dictionary in this particular format. And then once you've created a dictionary in this format, then the next step is a lot easier. You're going to create a list of the phonetic code words from a word that the user inputs. That way, the user can use the input to type a word. So, for example, Thomas. And then when they hit enter, they get a list printed out that is the phonetic alphabet code word for each of the letters in their input. So Tango Hotel Oscar Mike Alpha Sierra, which they can then read back using our little tool. I would say that to do step 1 is a lot harder than to do step 2, but essentially to do step 1 is a dictionary comprehension, creating a dictionary in this format from this CSV, and to do number 2 is basically completing the project and being able to create and print out a list of the code words based on the word that the user inputs. So I want you to pause the video, have a think about how you might solve this, and then go ahead to the course resources and download this starting zip file so that you can open it up inside PyCharm and create your project. Pause the video and give that a go now. Now we're finally ready to tackle our project, and this project is based on a real life struggle that I have. Often when I'm calling a company and over the phone I have to give some sort of details, right? They'll ask me, what is your name and can you spell it? So I'll have to be like Angela, and they're like, wait, was that an E? Was that a B? What did you say? In these cases, often I have to sort of default to some sort of naval alphabet where I say A is for Alpha, N for November, G for Golf, and then at some point I forget what E stands for. I'm like, E for elephant? And there have been times where I've just completely taken the mick and said things like M for mnemonic, P for pneumonia, W for wrench, which doesn't make any sense at all because these are silent letters. And I've had some very angry people, but it was quite fun. So now what we want to create is we want to create a tool that takes the NATO phonetic alphabet, which was generated because it's often really, really important for the other side to know exactly what it is that you said and which letters you're spelling out so that they don't mistaken your E for a B or your T for a C, because it all sounds really similar. Head over to the course resources page where you can find the starting files for the NATO alphabet project. I want you to practice with list comprehension and with dictionary comprehension. But in this case, we're not going through a dictionary per se, but we're actually going through a data frame because our data lives inside a CSV. So we're going to be reading it using pandas, and then we're going to end up with a data frame. Instead of having a bog standard dictionary comprehension where our keywords were new key, new value, for key value in dictionary.items. Now we're going to change this for loop. So instead of using the simple for loop, where we're just looping through a dictionary, we're going to use this particular loop. So then in this case, we're saying for index row in our data frame, and then it's dot iter rows as the method. So basically, I want you to use this different loop in order to loop through our data frame and then create a new dictionary using a new key and new value. So what exactly is it that I want you to do with this? Well, I want you to be able to take the CSV of NATO phonetic alphabet, and I want you to do two things to it. The first thing is for you to create a dictionary in this format. The format is basically the key is going to be the actual letter, so maybe A. And then the value is going to be the corresponding code for the NATO phonetic alphabet. So A actually is for alpha. And then the next one is B, which stands for Bravo. Essentially, we're going to take this CSV and we're going to convert it into a dictionary in this particular format, where the keys are the letters inside the CSV, so that first column, and then the values are the corresponding code words for each of those letters. And the reason why we're talking about iter rows and how to loop through rows of a data frame, instead of just getting you to get hold of the data frame and then just say to dict, like what we did before, is because it's not going to give it to you in this particular format. So you're going to have to use what you've learned about dictionary comprehension in order to create a dictionary in this particular format. And then once you've created a dictionary in this format, then the next step is a lot easier. You're going to create a list of the phonetic code words from a word that the user inputs. That way, the user can use the input to type a word. So, for example, Thomas. And then when they hit enter, they get a list printed out that is the phonetic alphabet code word for each of the letters in their input. So Tango Hotel Oscar Mike Alpha Sierra, which they can then read back using our little tool. I would say that to do step 1 is a lot harder than to do step 2, but essentially to do step 1 is a dictionary comprehension, creating a dictionary in this format from this CSV, and to do number 2 is basically completing the project and being able to create and print out a list of the code words based on the word that the user inputs. So I want you to pause the video, have a think about how you might solve this, and then go ahead to the course resources and download this starting zip file so that you can open it up inside PyCharm and create your project. Pause the video and give that a go now.